Okay, good evening, everyone. Hello to the people in the room and also to the people watching us from around the world. Always wanted to say that, it's actually true. But I hope you all can hear me. We're all gonna have to speak into the mic to make sure that the Zoom microphone picks us up. We're here for this is the first event that we're doing in English, in person, here at the Begin Center for a year and a half, I think. I believe March 2019 was the last time we did one. So I thank the brave souls that are here in person. I want to start by telling anyone, both here and on Zoom, who are not regular attendees of our English events, that I usually host an event on Zoom on a Wednesday at 8:30 Israel time, and I've been joined by a number of prominent journalists and public figures and academics and others. And if you want to receive my emails with details of those, then drop me an email, paulg@begincenter.org.il, paulg@begincenter, that's center spelled the incorrect American way, C-E-N-T-E-R. And I will add you to that list. Okay, so to today's event. It's my great pleasure to have with me Seth Frantzman, author of this fantastic new book. He's going to speak with us about the book, and then we'll have the opportunity to discuss it more with him and also with our other special guest, Anna Ahronheim, who's the military reporter for the Jerusalem Post. So without further ado, let me introduce Seth Frantzman, the author of Drone Wars, Pioneers, Killing Machines, and the Battle of the Future, and before that, the author of After ISIS, America, Iran, and the Struggle for the Middle East, which we also launched here at the Begin Center. He is a writer for Defense News, the Jerusalem Post, and a contributor to the National Interest. He's appeared on CNN, BBC, and other radio and television shows. He's covered the war against ISIS, 3 Gaza wars, the conflict in Ukraine, the refugee crisis in Eastern Europe, and also reported from many, many other countries in the Middle East and elsewhere. He has a PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's lectured in American Studies at Al-Quds University. He previously served as research associate at the Rubin Center for Research in International Affairs in Herzliya, and he is currently the executive director of the Middle East Center for Reporting and Analysis and a writing fellow at the Middle East Forum. Seth Frantzman, please.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. If you can't hear or anything, just raise your hand or shout. So I'm here to talk a little bit about drone wars, and then I think we'll have a nice conversation, and you can hear from Paul and Anna and ask questions as well, if you have some. So, as you mentioned, the last book I wrote was about the war against ISIS. And I remember in those days when we could still travel around the world and not have to quarantine and all the things that have been done to us in the last, let's say, year and a half. I used to go back and forth to places like Jordan and sometimes to northern Iraq, to the Kurdish region, which at that time was on the front line against Islamic State or ISIS. And in 2016, 2017, there was a huge battle by the Iraqi armed forces to retake a city called Mosul, which is the second largest city in Iraq. And this battle was fought a little bit like if you've heard about the Battle of Stalingrad or something. And it was fought, street by street, block by block, to defeat and destroy what was the remnants of the Islamic State, which was a genocidal terrorist organization, but was akin in some ways maybe to Hezbollah or Hamas in the sense that it was a very powerful organization and hard to defeat. And I remember going into Mosul, and one thing that scared the Iraqi soldiers was that ISIS was using drones. And I think anyone who grew up, I guess, when I grew up or earlier, I mean, when we think of drones, I think we probably mostly think of the American Predator drone, the one that became famous for airstrikes in places like Pakistan, Somalia, Afghanistan, a country that the United States is now leaving. But one feature of that conflict was that American air power was able to use unmanned vehicles, unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones to buzz around in the sky and wait for a target of opportunity or a terrorist to emerge from the house and then carry out an airstrike or call it in or whatever and have someone arrest that guy or what have you. So, but what was amazing about ISIS, and I think what we're seeing now from Hamas and other terrorist organizations, is that they now have access to this technology. And how they got that access is more simple than it might appear. And they didn't have to build a whole massive airplane like a Predator, which is the size of this room or something. What they did was, not only did they acquire off-the-shelf commercial quadcopter drones, which are, about yay big, they also were able to buy kits and things online because it's not that hard to build these machines. And then they had to take it a step further because obviously a commercial DJI quadcopter is something that you can use to take pictures of weddings or have fun with. It's not meant to be used to kill people, but they were able to innovate and stick grenades or mortar shells or some sort of weapon, and that scared the heck out of the Iraqi forces. And from that experience, and then also having covered some of the wars here in which Israel is pioneering the use of drones, I realized how much this technology is something that we're hearing about a lot. But when I was interested in learning more about it, there was no book out there. I mean, you can find books about the U.S. drone program with the Predators. You can find a lot of research about the U.S., whether the ethics of whether or not the United States should be killing terrorists or using targeted killings or things like that. There wasn't really what I could find, a book out there that gave a history of these machines, how they were developed, and how they will maybe define, let's say, the next generation of warfare. So I decided that I would try to kind of compile what I knew about it and then interview people from the US Air Force or from defense companies like Lockheed Martin or our defense companies in Israel. And Israel has several very large defense companies, one of which is IAI, another is Elbit, and another is Rafael. And then Israel has a huge ecosystem of startups, as you all know from the Startup Nation, but it has a lot of defense startups because one subcategory of doing high tech and startups is not just things like Waze, but Waze for war. And what does that mean? It means all the different interesting little algorithms and apps and artificial intelligence that you can stick onto or plug into military vehicles. And in this case, more often than not, that means drones. And to give you an example of how often, for instance, I was at a recent joint UAV drill that Israel was hosting in Palmachim, where they had members of 6 different militaries, mostly from NATO countries, and they were all jointly flying Israeli Hermes drones. And the commander of the base told us that around 80% of flight hours of Israeli aircraft, which aircraft includes drones, 80% is now drones. That means manned flight hours, even things like F-35s. I mean, the most amazing 5th generation fighter aircraft that exists in the world, when you still look at the overall amount of time of what's actually happening in the air, it's mostly drones. And that is something that we saw in the recent, I think we'll probably talk about the recent Gaza conflict, in which drones play a unique and key role in using artificial intelligence and using what's called drone swarms to provide commanders on the ground from the lowest level squad commanders or platoon commanders all the way to the highest level chief of staff and generals with real-time video and feed so that they know, ostensibly, hopefully know, kind of what's happening in front of them, and that they can track, for instance, where rockets are being fired from or where Hamas terrorists are emerging from and things like that. So I think those are the 2 different interesting sides of what we're seeing with drone warfare. One is the super, super high-tech side that none of us can even begin to understand when we're talking about what is artificial intelligence. How does it really apply to warfare? I mean, what is automatic target recognition and things like that? And what it is it's a computer program, it's algorithms allowing the machine to almost have a kind of brain so that it can learn from its own mistakes, so that it can, for instance, watch patterns of movement on a street. And not only that it can look for a certain type of pickup truck, for instance, you can tell it, we want you to find a pickup truck with what looks like an RPG or a rocket impact. No, not just that, but it can go far beyond that. And it can see all sorts of patterns of where, for instance, if they're trying to track where Hamas might have buried rockets in what was called this underground metro system, what have you, to try to see patterns of behavior and things like that, to allow, for instance, officers in some cases to have intelligence, not just of a whole building of where a terrorist is, but which room in the building, be able to see, for instance, a terrorist perhaps through a window or something like that. So really, really high level intelligence gathering and ability to do precision airstrikes. On the other side, the terrorists, not just ISIS types of terrorists or Hamas, but Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. And some of these groups are not really, let's say, terrorist groups in the sense of suicide bombers. They're terrorist armies. They have huge amounts of money. They're acquiring technology from places like Iran. In this case, Iran is trafficking technology to places like to Hamas. For instance, what is called the Babel-style drone, which is about from here to where Paul's sitting with a wingspan, looks like a crucifix. Not too complicated as a machine, but something that they can launch from a catapult that has a gyroscope that can be pre-programmed to fly into things. So imagine, for instance, if you're a terrorist group like Hamas, and you say, okay, we want to damage key strategic infrastructure of a state like Israel, like, for instance, an airport or an oil refinery, which they did, for instance, in Saudi Arabia. Iran used drones to do that. So what you do is, in the old days, you could fire rockets at that. Well, Israel has Iron Dome. Israel has technology that can shoot down rockets. Israel has technology that can shoot down drones. But what happens when you not only pre-program 30 drones to attack something like an airport or an aircraft carrier or what have you, but you program them all to swarm in different ways around it, some of them to come in low, some high, and you have all of them pre-programmed to do that. Our air defense systems, other types of defense systems that exist today, capable of detecting them all, shooting them all down with enough types of missiles or lasers, for instance, that Israel's now developing lasers to shoot down drones. So part of the book looks at also the other side of the coin, which is, how do you stop all these weapons? And I guess I'll just conclude there by saying I think what we look at when we look at the next type of wars that will be fought or are being fought, we will see, for instance, a lot more drones being used by countries like China, by Turkey, by Iran, obviously the United States and Israel, which already have, but also terrorist groups that are backed by Iran in the region. And we will see those systems being used in all sorts of new ways that can potentially inflict not only casualties, but can destroy strategic infrastructure, can destroy aircraft carriers, can be used, for instance, to attack Americans now in northern Iraq, where American bases up until recently were quite safe because they were in the Kurdish region. They were, in fact, often out of range of even rockets that could hit them. So we will see this type of technology deployed a lot more. And I think the countries that do not invest in thinking about new ways to use it and new ways to defend against it will find themselves in a very bad place, I think, in the future. I think we're already starting to see the way in which all this cool technology can be deployed in a bad way. We're also seeing ways in which it can be deployed in a cool way. Like at the Olympics, they had a drone image of they did a globe with all this little flying lights, and drones can help to save people at sea. You can put life preservers on them. They can save people. They can do all sorts of good things. And some of that's in the book, but mostly I think the book is hopefully a bit of a warning of the other side of the coin of what may come next.
Okay, I think we'll all have to speak into the mic to make sure that we can be heard on Zoom as well as by our audience here. Anna Ahronheim, thank you for joining us as well. Anna is the military reporter for Jerusalem Post. She grew up in Montreal, Canada, and has been in Israel for over a decade. She received her BA in criminology and criminal justice from Carleton University in Oslo, Canada, and an MA in counterterrorism from the IDC Herzliya. Anna, you cover the IDF, the Jerusalem Post, and you had an article just a couple of days ago, actually, by chance, entitled The AI Game Changer, all about this technological revolution in the IDF and the unprecedented use of artificial intelligence, robots, drones, and other things in the recent conflict with Hamas in the Operation Guardian of the Walls. Can you tell us can you give us some examples of how that technology was implemented and some of what you found in your research for that piece?
Great. First of all, hi everyone on Zoom and in person. It's really weird to be here in person, but it's nice. So yeah, I wrote this article about AI and the technology that the IDF is using and inventing, I guess if that's still the word, along with defense companies here in Israel. And when I went to speak to the officer in the C4I directorate, on the wall it said the road to the AIDF. Not the road to the IDF, the road to the AIDF. I thought that was pretty cool, a nice like play on words. And it just really shows that the IDF it sees AI and technology like that as the way forward. Kochavi, as chief of staff, has made it very clear that AI and technology is what he wants the army to move towards, that he wants his momentum or TNUFA multi-year plan to really focus on that. I mean, there's a whole lot of other parts of the momentum plan, but technology and the growth and the ability, like Seth said, to make it so that the soldier on the ground on the front lines is able to get everything that he needs and is able to talk to the pilot in the sky, to the intelligence officer back, in Tel Aviv and in the ball of the Kilia. I mean, as someone, I can look at it simply saying, wow, the soldier on the front line wasn't able to talk to the pilot in the sky. He wasn't able to, just get that chain of command and know where he needs to hit next and what kind of weaponry he has. But no, and with this new technology, especially what we saw in Gaza, the way that they were able to take everybody onto the same military internet, for example, and use technology like drones, and like Seth said, 80% of IAF hours are drones. And during the operation in Gaza in May, there was at least 20 drones at all times over just the northern Gaza Strip. And all of that, intelligence that these drones are bringing in and feeding to the artillery batteries on the ground or back to the Southern Command headquarters or back to Tel Aviv, all at the same time, and everyone could look at that and get that intelligence and know exactly what is happening in real time, was allowed the IDF to, as I say, close the circle on launch pads. If a rocket was fired, within minutes they were able to know where that rocket was fired from and how to hit it. And I think that in the future, if we go up against Hezbollah, which is completely different than Hamas in Gaza, and Hezbollah has very advanced technology that Hamas doesn't have. They also have drones, and we've seen armed drones come in from Lebanon. And during the operation in May, we also saw a drone come in from that was sent in via Iran. That landed in Beit Shan, which apparently is still in a fish pond in Beit Shan. It hasn't been collected by the IDF yet. But with the other side having that same technology, the IDF has to keep up and stay one step ahead. And again, the drone drill, I'm going to touch on every aspect that you spoke about. The drone drill that just finished in Palmachim, and I live just a 10-minute drive from Palmachim, and the amount of drones that I heard overhead, it's like, oh my God, this white noise is perfect for me to go to sleep to. But it shows that the IDF also knows that it needs to cooperate and needs to learn from other militaries that are using this technology, such as the US and the UK, and get what they can from other militaries, because they know that when the war comes with Hezbollah, it's not going to be easy. And even with all the AI that they have and all the new technology that they're planning and using and producing right now, if they don't learn from others, and I'm sure all of that information is in the book, they're not gonna. It's going to be a hard time to go up against Hezbollah.
Thank you very much. For those, just a little warning that I'm going to be looking at my phone. It's not me checking if my wife's texted me or something. I'm actually looking at questions on the Zoom, because I'm inviting people from the Zoom audience to submit questions as well. So I'm going to shortly invite questions from the audience here in the room, but also for those of you watching wherever you are in the comfort of your home, please do write questions in the Q&A. Seth, you wrote in the book, you said that you're talking about all this advancement of drone technology. You said this is a turning point in military history, like the jet propulsion revolution or the development of the rifle. But if to sound a little bit like a Philistine for a second, is there any pushback? I know that I read some voices from retired IDF commanders or maybe current senior commanders that there needs to be some balancing and like we need to keep in mind the mentality of boots on the ground. And it brought to mind some of the criticism of the Second Lebanon War, where there was the over-reliance, or the criticism of over-reliance on air power. Did you encounter any of that? And I'm interested in Anna's thoughts as well on that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's interesting, this debate about whether or not, unmanned vehicles can replace, mostly in the case, manned aircraft, of what they've been talking about. So, and that's a discussion that, has gone back even to the 1990s, where people predicted, well, the future of war will just be all these unmanned machines. And I think Elon Musk made these very famous comments where he was invited to speak to a bunch of Air Force officers. And he said to them, your F-35, we can build a drone and we'll defeat that and no problems. And of course, he was a bit mocked for that, because there is no drone out there that can defeat an F-35. I mean, the F-35 is an extremely advanced machine. So most drones are very slow, and most drone operators, when they speak of drones, they say that they're for dull, dirty, and dangerous missions. They're dull because it's boring to sit for 36 hours over a guy's house buzzing around. They're dirty missions because it might be targeted assassinations, or it might be something that is involved in going into a place like Pakistani airspace, to kill someone, or killing the Qasem Soleimani or what have you. So these are considered somehow, well, it's not as honorable as if a sniper went in there and shot him in the head or something. I mean, I don't know why it's exactly different, to be honest. I mean, a Hellfire missile from a drone or a Hellfire missile from an F-16, I don't really understand why one is wrong. But anyway, and then they're dangerous missions, because drones are great for missions in which you don't want to sacrifice pilots. I mean, Israel invented drones primarily to go after Syrian air defense in the 1982 Lebanon war and prior to that. And the idea was Israel had suffered losses in 73 of pilots. And why should you sacrifice pilots against air defense when you can send up a drone, have real-time video of the air defense battery moving around, and then send in your missiles to destroy it very efficiently? And we saw that, by the way, with the Azerbaijanis destroying Armenian air defenses in the war last year, and the Armenians did not have much of a chance because most of what they had was destroyed by drones that specially hunt and seek out radiation-emitting radars and things like that. From Turkey. Yeah, well, no, those are mostly, I think, Israeli, probably Israeli drones. But Turkey has the Bayraktars, which were used to go after things like artillery or armored units. But Israel makes a lot of drones that are called loitering munitions that hunt down radars, because it's the same legacy of the 80s. So look, I think there is a discussion. Of course, pilots don't want to be told, a lot of money goes into training pilots. It's a sexy career. I mean, nobody wants to be told, yeah, actually, we could be replaced with a robot, or not even that. You can be replaced with a person sitting in a room somewhere, because actually the real story of drones is that drone operators sit in a kind of canister, right, in a trailer that's air conditioned, and they fly the machines. And most of the machines these days are autonomous. They take off on their own. They come back to base now. In fact, there's no real flying that has to be done. It's just point and click. And then there's a sensor operator seeing what the thing is seeing. And pilots don't want to hear that. Listen, you know what? Actually, basically everything you can do can be automated. We don't need you. You're not all Captain Sully. You're not going to be landing on any rivers. It's okay. I mean, and if it's a drone, it's okay. Ditch it in the river. So I think no one wants to hear that. I think what we are seeing, despite that pushback, is that the next generation of armored vehicles that Israel is going to make will be optionally manned, ostensibly. They'll have 2 people as opposed to 4 in them, and they will be optionally manned, i.e. you can have 2 people or you can take the people out and let the machine be driven into a place, let's say a place where you're afraid that it will be destroyed. So you'll have machines that can help to lug things like a kind of Sherpa for soldiers. You can, and they're building things like that already. You'll have unmanned things in the water. I mean, why do you need people in submarines? I mean, have you ever seen Dust Boot? Why are people in them? You should it should be unmanned. I mean, most of these machines really shouldn't have people in them. It's one thing to have a fighter ace in Top Gun. It's another thing to ask yourself, wait, why are people even in some of these machines? Take them out. So I think that's where we're going. But as we saw with the recent conflicts, drones by themselves don't win wars. Of course, people have to win wars, and boots on the ground have to win. The Americans didn't win in Afghanistan, and they had a lot of drones. And look, the Houthis with the drones in fighting the Saudis, they're not defeating Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabia is not going to be destroyed by drones. They're just harassing them. So I think we're quite far from that idea that like it's all going to be all these unmanned vehicles like Terminators.
I would agree that I think we're a very long way off from taking the pilot out of the plane. Speaking to senior IF officials, they said that yes, the drones are definitely the future, but it'll be a long time before we have an unmanned plane, like fighter plane. The US, I think they were doing a program where they were trying to see if a drone can go up against an F-16, I think it was. I don't remember how that pilot worked out, but it is the future. At the same time, for example, on the Gaza border, there's a lot of robots. You have the Jaguar, for example. I wrote about it a few weeks ago. It's completely autonomous robot that can patrol the Gaza border, that can detect if, for example, this rock wasn't there last week. Maybe this rock is something that's suspicious, that could be a bomb. It can even shoot at people if necessary. It's a very interesting machine. So do you need to have human patrols on the ground on the Gaza Strip patrolling 24/7, or can you put a robot like the Jaguar and you have the operator back at the command who's able to see exactly what needs to be seen and take the decision if a shot needs to be taken or if a stone is suspicious, it needs to be checked out. So you do have that. I do think that I don't see how we're going to get fighter pilots out of the planes. At least not until my son becomes a pilot. I would like him very much to become a pilot. But I think that if we look at drones, you have to have a mix of a fighter plane and drones and the boots on the ground, all of it together, technology and the human making that decision, whether to carry out the strike or not carry out the strike. In Gaza, the IDF released a video showing a pilot calling off a strike because there were people surrounding the building. And, with the second that needed to happen, whether to really make that strike or have the Shabak call the people that were in the area, that needs to be the human. It can't be a drone. We're not there yet. In the article that I wrote this weekend about AI, I spoke to a woman at Rafael who was telling me that there's 3 different waves of AI. We're now in the second wave, almost at the third wave, where we want to have the machine make the decision and tell us why they made that decision. And until the machine can tell us why he makes a decision, we can't rely solely on machines like drones.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience here? Oh, Seth, good, okay. So I'm going to take a question from the audience here, then go to a question from Zoom, okay? Jeff, at the back.
So Seth or Anna, could you talk a little bit about the use of drone technology and WMD for, let's say, mass casualty terror events? My nightmare scenario is terrorists sitting in hotel rooms to the east and west of Times Square on December 31st, launching drones down those side streets into Times Square. And they were equipped, let's say, with radiological or biological or chemical agents that could be aerosolized over big crowds. I see pitifully little in the literature. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Just to sum up, for those on Zoom that didn't hear, Jeff asked a question about his nightmare scenario of WMD and aerosolized biological or chemical weapons being used by drones in a place like Times Square.
So hi, Jeff. I'll try to answer that question saying that I don't see that coming at the moment. The radiological, chemical nightmare scenario, I think what we could see, I mean, like you discussed, that many of these drones used by terror groups are small quadcopters that you can get off of eBay, Amazon, what have you. And you can go into the crowd and some of these drones, like, I don't remember how long ago it was where you had the sniper in the Boston area that was, you know, drones can do that too. You can have any sort of weaponry placed onto a drone, but I'm sure that in New York and in the US in general, they have the technology that's able to, especially on December 31st before New Year's, to detect if there's any threats in the area, and if needed, to down them. Now, some technology that's used here is this smart shooter, which is just a little application that you put onto whichever gun you have, and you can take out a kite, like that used to be flown in Gaza. You can take out drones. You don't need to be really a smart shooter to do it. I was able to shoot down a moving balloon from 500 meters away with this type of set that you put on the gun, and I'm sure you can do the same with the drone. It's definitely a worrisome scenario to think that you could be doing, your stuff in New York and shopping or celebrating in Times Square, and all of a sudden something's on top of you and dropping a bomb or shooting the crowd. But I do think that law enforcement in general is aware of the situation. Are they ready for it? It's another question. But I personally can't see it happening, but maybe you can see that.
I would add to that.
Okay, I'm going to go to a question from here, and then I promise I'll get back to questions from the audience in the room. So Jeffrey, not everyone who asks a question will be called Jeff or Jeffrey, but Jeffrey asks, to what degree can the functionability of a drone be subject to cyber attack while on a mission? Maybe I could add to that by asking, is cyber something that Israel is thinking about in terms of counter-drone defense? Israel using cyber against drones?
I'll try to answer. I mean, from what I understand, the counter-drone technology is based on, a whole variety of multi-layered methods of trying to first detect that there is a drone and sort out the fact that the drone is not just a large bird or something, because it's something low flying, it's hovering around. So you first be able to detect it at a quite long distance because you'd like to prepare for it. And then also then to visually confirm what's out there. So to have that optics as well. And then to have methods that would, for instance, not require you to shoot it down necessarily, but to jam its signal or even hack into it, take control of it, make it stop, make it land. And then if that didn't work, obviously then to shoot it down with some sort of device or burn it with lasers or what have you. I mean, I think in general, I would think that electronic warfare, which exists anyway, is something that would be good against drones. Also GPS denied environments, so that drones, for instance, that are being guided towards destination using a GPS coordinate or what have you, will find that they can't get there. So, and then they will just drop out of the sky or just keep going or what have you. So there's a big problem, I think, with some of these Iranian drones, for instance, is that they don't have a signal back to the operator because they function a lot more like a cruise missile. So they function like a V-1 rocket in the Second World War, to be honest. I mean, it's not complicated technology. They go towards a thing, a destination, and try to run into it. So some of them can be quite precise because of GPS and things like that. But I think that hacking into them, jamming them, all those types of technology is kind of a key to all this new way of war that we're living.
And I'm just going to add to that the IDF definitely has the capabilities to down drones using electronic warfare, but we've seen multiple times they have an Apache go up and take down the drone with a missile. It's definitely a cheaper and easier way to do it with EW, but at the end of the day, a lot of the times they rely on Apaches to take down the bigger drones, the ones out of Gaza. Like I said before, they either shoot it down or they have EW.
Thank you, both of you. Okay, questions? The lady over here.
Seth was talking about artificial intelligence enabling people to see exactly who's in a room. So if you can do that, can you also protect people from being killed? I mean, the worst publicity we had from the Gaza conflict was that photograph of all those children. Would there be a way with artificial intelligence to not kill them?
Just the question is whether artificial intelligence can be used to actually prevent or limit the casualties, civilian casualties.
I mean, I would think that what we've heard from the IDF in general is that the warfare has become not only much more precise, but that they are able to save huge numbers of lives because of the precision, because of the time limit, because of things like artificial intelligence. So I think the overall tragedy and reality of war is that we've come to expect conflict now to have basically zero casualties. And I think it's just a strange element of our time, because if we think of the history of warfare, I mean, we talk about the bombing of Dresden, Hiroshima, but not even that. In the First World War, the Somme, Passchendaele, what have you. I mean, you're talking about battles in which 20 or 30,000 people would be killed in a day. Nowadays, we'd like to have a battle in which actually no one does, because the ideal form of warfare, apparently, I mean, is what the campaign that Israel has been conducting in Syria, which has gone on for many years, 5 or 6 years, and has included thousands of airstrikes against Iranian targets, according to reports. And as far as we can tell, the number of casualties is not a lot. It's usually less. It's usually almost zero, or it's 1 or 2 in each attack. So it's really almost none, and very few civilians. I've not heard of many civilians or any being killed in Israeli strikes in Syria, which is quite phenomenal. So, I mean, Gaza is an extremely congested environment. So even your best supercomputer, the computer is fallible. Nothing's perfect. I mean, you're still using a munition. The United States has invented this ninja weapon, in which you have a Hellfire missile, but instead of a warhead that explodes, it's just hard material and some swords that come out that can kill a person and ostensibly keep the person next to them alive. It just hits one person because it's just kind of like dropping a huge heavy rock on that person, and then the other person may be slightly injured. But that's rather than using a Hellfire missile that will kill a series of people. So, but at the end of the day, I just think artificial intelligence can do a lot. Of course, it can tell us how many people went in that room, who's the person. But war is going to kill people. I mean, and also on our side. I mean, the Iron Dome system is great, and it has a 90% effective rate, and it's great. But you just don't have a conflict in which which there are zero casualties. So I think as best as we can get everything, can hone everything down, I feel like we have reached almost that method of warfare. I think that Israel has reached this AI type of conflict in which it seems to me casualties are extremely low for the number of attacks. 4,000 rockets fired from Gaza. That's a lot. How many munitions dropped on Gaza? I don't know. But obviously there was a lot of munitions. And actually the number of casualties is very few. But the Western world tells us, no, one casualty is too many. And so I think that's what we're up against in terms of this AI revolution, is that the AI revolution can never really maybe meet the expectation that's there.
Okay, thank you, Seth. I'm going to go to a question from the Zoom. Shmuel Yerushalmi, who he asks whether two of you what do you think about the possibility that Israel will join with other countries? He mentions several countries here: Russia, India, China, Tajikistan, and Belarus. I'm not sure quite why he mentions those countries, but essentially whether Israel could join with other countries who are threatened by terrorism and have some sort of unified fight campaign against drone terrorism.
I'll try to answer that one and then hand it off to Seth. I don't see Israel entering into any sort of coalition with Russia and China. I think that they're more likely to enter a coalition with the Gulf states that we've just normalized ties with. Those countries have a lot of very advanced technology as well, fighting terrorism as well. Not the same type that we are, but they're all going up against Iran as well. And to enter in a coalition with them is more likely than Tajikistan, China, and Russia. China and Russia are also very advanced in terms of AI and drone warfare. China is very secretive about what they do, as is Russia. But Kochavi and a lot of senior officers that I've spoken with always quote Putin in saying that whoever rules AI rules the world. And they love that quote. They take that quote as like the mantra for the momentum plan. And I think that the IDF will use AI and drones to fight terrorism in a way that we weren't able to see before, and we did not see in the Intifada. I think it's a very interesting choice of Belarus and Tajikistan. I'm going to look into that to see why Israel might want to join with them. But I think they're more likely to go up against China and Russia than join with them.
Yeah, I think I'd just add that I think that there already exists congressional U.S. funding for counter UAV and UAS technology. So there already is an existing framework of U.S.-Israel cooperation for that. And there already is some cooperation, I think, and again, a Gulf partnership or joint venture to deal with this kind of issue as well. So I think we will see, actually, if we talk about a real counter technology revolution or whatever Israel alliance, I think we will see, actually will include the US, India, Israel, the Gulf states like the UAE, Greece, and maybe some of these NATO countries that just came here. I think that's where we'll see joint discussions about how to best create an air defense system that looks a bit like Israel's, a multi-layered, air defense system with a joint picture of what's happening in the air, integrating that with lasers, microwave weapons, and things that can be used to down drones, which Israel says Israel will start to put lasers out there with Iron Dome and things like that to go after drones. And I think that many countries will want to be part of that soon. So I think that's actually the alliance system we'll probably see.
Okay, thank you. To be fair to Shaw, he actually did mention India as well. So you didn't dismiss all of his suggestions. There was one in there that he got. Okay, questions? Yeah, Emmanuel.
Who's choosing the philosophy of the drones? As an example, you could have a car will save lives no matter what, save the most lives, no matter kill the driver. Who chooses the philosophy of the drones in Israel?
Question about the philosophy of the drones.
I think we're talking about doctrine, right? And we're talking about when the algorithm is put in, what the drone or the AI, the brain is actually, what parameters it actually might decide upon. For instance, a high value target, like for instance, back in the day, Sheikh Hasina or whatever it was, or a Bin Laden type. And wait a sec, there's a civilian car near it, but wait, we've been waiting to get this guy for 10 years. Is it worth it? I mean, and then of course the drone doesn't make the decision. A person has to do it. But as you said, what we really want to know about AI is, wait, why did you feed the operator that decision to say yes or no? What's going on? Can we even trust the machines to make this decision? I think so. But I don't know. I think that's actually, I don't think anyone's adversaries would want to know the secret sauce that goes into that algorithm. But I assume in Israel's case, it puts a very high value on human life, as opposed to just killing the adversary. Whereas I assume for some bad actors out there, it would be the opposite.
Okay, yes, sir.
Thank you both for talking to us and Paul for organizing this. And another nightmare scenario is, so far, Israel has had almost a free hand in attacking Iran in Syria. Whereas recently we learned that the Russians, a few days ago, the Russians are stepping in and are blocking the actions of Israel. It seems like they're testing this new government. I want to ask you if you think there is a role for some smarter drones to deal with this situation, or what do you think is Israel a way of acting now when that line has been curtailed? And also, I just want to mention to you that Israel has to be, this is the philosophy of the 1980s, Israel has to be 2 stages ahead of the enemy, always, for obvious reasons.
Okay, the question was essentially about the incidents recently of Russia stepping in and preventing Israel, or allegedly preventing Israel from having a free hand in striking in Syria and Iran, certainly in Syria, and whether Israel could use drone technology or smart technology to get around that somehow.
The reports that we've read, I think, don't also mention the fact that all of the Syrian anti-aircraft missiles are Russian. Most of them even manned by the Russians. So it's not that they're curtailing Israel's actions over Syria. I think that Israel's going to continue to strike in Syria. They know very well where the Russians are, where the Russian interests are, where they cannot strike, because we don't want to have another repeat of when the Russian intelligence plane was down in September 2018, I think. Yeah, something like that. So Israel does not want a repeat of that. I think you're right that they're trying to test a new government, but Benny Gantz has been the defense minister under Bennett and under Netanyahu. He's, I think, has good connections with the Russian armed forces. I'm sure that he's going to make it quite clear to them that this is going to continue. Again, I think it's a political thing. I think militarily, not much is going to change. Again, they can also be testing the Biden administration, right? It's also relatively new. And Russia likes to project their power. And when they see an opportunity, be it politically or militarily, they're going to take it. But I know Seth wrote about it today, so maybe you know? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Yes, Seth.
So when all is said and done, what does it mean to win a war when you're not expected to take any casualties and the enemy can just at random strike civilian populations?
Okay, what does it mean to win a war in this age where we're not expected to take civilian casualties and the enemy can inflict maximum casualties? Who wants to this is a deeply philosophical question.
That's the key question. I don't think we have an answer to that. I mean, I think we're not seeing. Look, we live in an era where wars are not. And we live, especially let's say in the West, especially. I mean, in which the idea of what we thought about when you read about wars, like, well, how did the Civil War begin? Well, they fired on Fort Sumter, and well, then it ended in Appomattox because everything had a beginning and an end. And I think, I don't think that's a Western way of war, but I think certainly many people grew up thinking that that's what happens. And we talked about, there was a time period when, wars were these ostensibly gentlemanly endeavors. And then we talk about the era of total war in which countries were totally destroyed, not like the Peace of Versailles where Germany was primarily attacked. No, but the peace of unconditional surrender where a country is just totally flattened and destroyed. And that's when you win a war. But we're in a different age now. I mean, the Cold War came and went, and then we go to the era of US global hegemony, and that began an era in which there were large numbers of small conflicts, none of which were ever apparent, most or none of which were ever really won, and they continued. And I think it's part of the process, probably, of the erosion of American global dominance that we're starting to see that question of, wait, how come no one ever wins? Because I think we're moving towards probably a world order that will be more multipolar and dominated more by Asian countries, apparently. And so the notion of what it means to win these conflicts and how they all turn out, and the prepositions that Western countries put into what is winning, what is losing, I think will probably be altered. And that may be one reason we're seeing these ungoverned spaces, these things that no one ever really does seem to. So I don't think we have an answer to it, but the answer may be a much more complicated question about where the world is going, and the nature of what we define as war and what we define as these parameters, like when did it begin, when did it end.
I'm just going to touch on that question as well. If you look at, all the conflicts that we've had with Gaza, I mean, is every round of fighting with them a war? Was the May operation a war? Was
Part
it
of a larger war, to be sure.
Right, but did we win? Did they win? Who wins? Nobody won. And we're going to see another round of fighting, whenever that comes, it's going to happen. But no one ever wins, really. There's also the perception of how each side takes it, because Yahya Sinwar thinks that he won. He's sure that he won. We think that we won as well here in Israel, but did we? Did we really win if we're just going to see another round of fighting happen? So I think how the media takes it, how the people of every side take it as well. I mean, it's just never ending. And I think that, like Seth just spoke about, it's something that, it's completely different from the Second World War, the First World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. Those ended. But the way that we are now, and I think part of that has to do with social media. I think that we're going to go into an age where nothing really ends, it just begins.
Continues endlessly.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience here? Yes, madam.
I'd like to know Anna, how did you become interested in your field?
Okay, a personal question is here to Anna about how she became interested in her field.
Wow, okay. So I didn't do the army. When I moved to Israel, I was actually told I'm too old, go have babies. I do not want babies at 22. My father was in the Air Force in the US, as was my grandfather. My father never really spoke about his time in the Air Force. He served in Vietnam, but I always knew that he had his Air Force trunk in the basement. I always opened it, looked at what was inside it. I was always very curious about it. And I always loved the Middle East. I always had, huge interest in the history, the culture. I actually wanted to move to Beirut. My family said, absolutely not. Go a little bit south of Tel Aviv. I was like, okay, good weather, beaches, good food, why not? And I studied counterterrorism and homeland security at IUC. Kind of took also my interest in criminology, criminal gangs, criminal networks, make that a bit more international, you can have terror networks. And this combined my interest growing up of the military and especially the Air Force and my love for the Middle East. And I found a job at the Jerusalem Post. And the rest is history.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions here? Okay, we have a question from the Zoom. I'm afraid it's not getting any less dystopian. The questions. So someone, I'm not being rude. He's anonymous, or she. I've seen ads for small drones that can hone in on phone numbers and shoot one bullet. They obviously could be sent in droves. Is this a viable scenario? Is this, Seth? Can you confirm or deny this possibility?
I mean, I don't know. I did see once an unmanned small vehicle that actually has a pistol built into it, and it was built for accompanying special forces to do it right in a house, and then it had this ability to shoot a few shots or something. I don't know, the options of what you can stick on the drones is endless. Obviously, you can put a pizza on it, or you could I guess you could put a handgun on it, or one bullet. I don't know why you'd have to just want one. Again, the options are endless, and drones have been used to try in attempted assassinations, I think, in Venezuela or something. So what we will see with these machines, is I assume we'll see lots of different things taking place with them. And that's obviously a possibility. Weird things like that. Swarming drones that all can shoot, or all of them can explode when they hit something. It's probably something that would be quite effective for terrorists or some group to use, even drug gangs or something, to kill a rival or something. I guess we'll wait and see if something like that ever materializes.
Okay, so I think we're out of questions. I'm going to close with just one final question. We'll get a short answer from each of you, maybe. The book is titled Drone Wars, pioneers, killing machines, artificial intelligence, and the battle for the future. So on that last point, the battle for the future, I think those of us, those of us living in Israel, so everyone in this room, I think, and perhaps others watching on Zoom, we are used to, despite the craziness of the chaos of the region in which we live, we're used to feeling pretty secure because Israel has done an extraordinary job of protecting its citizens through the IDF and its security establishment and the intelligence and other things. Do you, both of you, feel from your research, Seth, and your reporting and information, Anna, that in this battle for the future, this technological revolution that both Israel and its adversaries are part of, that Israel has the upper hand, will be able to keep the upper hand, and we should feel pretty maybe not comfortable, but certainly that we can continue to feel that Israel is at the cutting edge of defense and security of its citizens.
Well, it Seth spoke, so I'll let him have the last word. I think that Israel has a lot of work ahead of it in order to make sure that its citizens remain safe. Like you said, we are safe, and at the same time, our enemies are always, they're not, sitting at home watching Netflix and chilling. They're working really hard to make sure that they can harm as many people, civilians and soldiers alike, that they can, using whatever they can. The cheaper, the better. And if they're able to take a drone and attach a grenade to it and drop it onto a tank and have that explode, then they're going to do that. And if Israel finds a way to stop that drone from dropping that RPG, then they're going to do it. And then the next time there's going to be, another competition of how can I make sure that the IDF is not able to do this, and the IDF, it's always going to be back and forth. I do think that the IDF has a lot on its plate to work with. More than groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. I do think that there's also going to be a lot of joint networking and cooperation with countries that we've not seen before or haven't seen in public before. And I think that's going to give Israel another step forward, or 3 steps forward. But I do think that, we can't just stop and say, okay, we're good, we're golden. That's never gonna happen here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would just add that I think that the problem is that Israel's, what Israel's adversaries want to do is not necessarily destroy Israel. I mean, they may say they want to do that, but for them to think that they won, all they need to do is get one ballistic missile through to hit Ben Gurion Airport. All they have to do is hit one gas platform or something like that, and that looks like a huge setback for Israel. I mean, in the recent conflict, the airport was closed. I mean, it's not good because this is a country that has basically one large civilian airport. We happen to be lucky in a bizarre thing of having the pandemic, so I don't really notice it. But I think that, having airports closed or having critical infrastructure targeted is very problematic. And therefore, Israel may be far ahead of the enemy, but the enemy can inflict certain types of damage, which are very, very bad. I think that also, because it's now 20 years since the Second Intifada, I think a lot of people have grown up, a whole generation, not expecting to see mass casualties and bus bombings. And I think that, that would be shocking to society to see, for instance, a war with Hezbollah in which Iron Dome was tasked primarily with defending critical infrastructure, and civilians were under rocket fire of thousands of rockets falling on cities, not killing tens of thousands of people, but killing people here and there. And that would look like a defeat, at least in the initial stages of the conflict. And I think that's where the country would be traumatized, at least temporarily. So that's the difference in terms of this asymmetric or whatever that we have against the enemies. I should say, by the way, I have a bunch of books, so if people want them, I can sign them for you. And they cost 80 shekels. I'm sorry, but I have to charge something. But anyway, I do have them if you'd like to purchase one. I'll be happy to sign.
Okay, thank you so much, Seth Frantzman and Anna Ahronheim. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching at home on Zoom. My name is Paul Gross. if you want to join my mailing list for these events on Zoom and live, more live hopefully, email me paulg@vegascenter.org.al, and Seth will be signing books at the back, just behind where you're sitting. And for those of you on Zoom, sorry, you can't get the books here, but they are available on Amazon, I believe, Seth, and Book Depository and other bookstores. So thank you everyone and have a great evening.
That's great. Yeah.